All right, welcome everyone. My name is Lily Hearn Foundation. I'm the Programs Director at CUE. Thank you for joining us tonight for a conversation with John Feodorov, Ruba Katrib, and Asia Tail on the occasion of John's solo exhibition, Assimilations, on view through March 31st. Before I introduce our speakers, I have a few housekeeping notes. Live captions are available tonight. If you click on the CC closed caption button at the bottom of your screen and select show subtitles, you will be able to view these. This panel is being recorded, so please turn off your video and rename yourself using an alias if you'd like to protect your privacy. Please keep your microphone muted during the lecture portion of the evening to ensure the best audio experience for everyone. John Feodorov Assimilations is a winning selection from CUE's 2020 open call for solo exhibitions. Drawing upon his experience growing up half Navajo, Diné, and half white in the suburbs of Los Angeles, Feodorov's multimedia installation, paintings and prints explore how identity and memory are shaped amidst the violent pressures of cultural assimilation and the legacy of settler colonialism in the United States. Feodorov grew up in Southern California in the city of Whittier. As a child, his family made annual visits to his grandparents' land on the Navajo Reservation. His time spent there continues to inform his art. His work has been featured in several publications, including Time and Time Again by Lucy Lippard, Art and Religion, edited by Aaron Rosen, and Manifestations, edited by Dr. Nancy Marie Mislow. He was also featured in the first season of the series Art 21, Art for the 21st Century. He is co-founder of Animal Saint, an interdisciplinary art collaboration with composer and musician Paul Amiel, and he served as an arts commissioner for the city of Seattle from 2000 to 2003. He holds the position of Associate Professor of Art at Fairhaven College of Interdisciplinary Studies at Western Washington University in Washington State. As part of CUE's commitment to providing professional development opportunities, finalists from the open call are paired with curator mentors who provide support throughout the process of developing the exhibition. We're honored to work with Ruba Katrib as the curator mentor to John Feodorov. Katrib is curator at MoMA PS1 in New York, where she has curated exhibitions such as Theater of Operations, The Gulf Wars, 1991 to 2011, co-organized with Peter Ely, the retrospective of Simone Fatale in 2019, I was about to say 1999, and the solo show of Edgar Keep of Birds, Caribbean Collective, Fernando Palma Rodriguez, and Julia Phillips. From 2012 to 2018, she was curator at Sculpture Center in New York, where she curated over 20 exhibitions. Asia Tail wrote a text on John's work as part of CUE's Art Critic Mentoring Program, which pairs emerging art writers with established art critics who work with them as they produce original texts on exhibiting artists. Asia Tail is an artist, curator, and organizer based in Seattle, Washington. She is a co-founder of Yahoo, an Indigenous artist collective, and works as a creative consultant with various organizations locally and nationally. Asia is a citizen of the Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma and a proud member of the diverse urban Native community in the Pacific Northwest. Tonight, a presentation of John's work will be followed by a conversation between our three guest speakers with time for audience questions at the end. And now it's my pleasure to hand it over to John Feodorov.
Thank you, Lily. Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming today. I guess I'm going to talk about my work. That's the plan. If I don't know how many of you may have had the chance to actually visit the gallery, but as you walk in, there's in the front gallery, there's an installation piece, which I'll talk about later. But I'd like to begin with a painting that actually is a prototype, I think, for the other works in the gallery. And this is a painting called "I Cannot Speak My Mother's Language." This was done a couple of years ago. I had just given a lecture at Boise State University, and I was sitting in the airport for my flight back to Seattle. And I started thinking about, I saw, while I was in Boise, I saw an exhibition by the artist Rick Bartow, who passed away 2 or 3 years ago, I think. And I've always loved Rick Bartow's work, but I'd never really seen it in person. And so it was a wonderful, eye-opening experience for me to actually see Rick's work. And just his mastery with paint and graphics. And I started thinking, gee, I would really love to, I wonder what it's like to just paint, instead of always thinking of like some big concept. Now, the thing is that there is I guess there is a big concept to this painting, as with the others, but it initially started out as an attempt to just kind of deal with paint as a medium. What I did do is I took some pages from a hymn book, actually the same hymn book that's in the installation in the front gallery, and scanned them, and then glued them to a wood panel, and used that as sort of a catalyst to begin improvising over, without having any preconceived ideas. And so this is the outcome. Now, the thing is that those pages or those hymns are Pentecostal hymns that are translated into Navajo, and the book was handed down to me by my mother, who, even though she wasn't Pentecostal, had this book. I don't know whose it was. I think it may have been one of her sisters, but it's one of those heirlooms, I guess you would call it, that I decided to kind of riff off of in terms of this painting specifically. But as I finished this painting, the idea of I cannot speak my mother's language came to mind, and it meant the Navajo language primarily. I mean, I know some words, but not certainly not fluent in any way. But I was also thinking about Christianity, as a language, and that I could no longer identify with, or I think even, or connect to Christianity, even though it was it played such a large role in my life. And after I completed this painting, I realized that those hymn pages that I had glued to the wood panel, I could get a lot more out of them. And so I created some more wood panels and adhered more pages of the hymns to those panels. And then those turned into the assimilation paintings. And maybe if we could go to the next slide. This is the installation that I was talking about originally, and these are the hymn pages. Here I've adhered them to these plaques. I think the term is decoupage them. It's something that I used to do as a kid before I became a big falutin artist type. I used to do a lot of crafty things. So I wanted to kind of, bring that in too. But could we go past the installation and maybe to some of the past that? There's the actual hymn book. Okay, so these paintings in the gallery. Actually, could we go to another slide, maybe to keep going? There, no, keep going. I guess the one we want. There we go. There we go. So these 4 paintings are part of a series called Assimilations, and what I did with these were some of them I included pages from that same hymn book, others from a Jehovah's Witness hymn book, which is the sect of Christianity that I grew up with. And then collage different elements that either were actual influences in my life growing up in the suburbs of Los Angeles, or somehow represent those influences. If we could go to maybe a detail of one of these paintings. They're never where you want them to be, right? Oh, that's a good one. Okay. Well, yeah, let's stay on this one. So assimilation number 1. So the part of Southern California that I grew up in, these long blocks of concrete walls that kind of represented the borders between people's backyards and the sidewalk were definitely a memorable element of the landscape that I grew up in. And so at first I was trying to paint this actual photograph. And it's actually, I got this image from Google Maps, which I guess we can talk about a little later. But this idea of these walls and the idea of territory and secrets behind these walls really interested me in thinking about my own suburban family. In the kind of really fluorescent pink section there is an enlarged page from the Jehovah's Witness hymn book. There's also a piece of astroturf glued on there, and barely visible above that is a scene from, or a photograph from the 1950s, maybe early 1960s, of an Indian boarding school. Let's see, can we go to the next photograph? In the lower right-hand corner there is my mother, my brother, dressed in a Cub Scout uniform, and one of my uncles, and then myself in a cowboy hat near there, looking very short. And again, this kind of suburban life, you can see palm trees in the back, also telephone poles. But I just kind of wanted to bring in these images, and also going back to the idea of playing with paint. When I was a young artist as an undergrad, my degree was in painting and drawing, and I can't really say that I learned much of how to do painting, really. But I had these very kind of conceptual art teachers, so that's why painting was just sort of a, you know, I don't know, wasn't really important. But I really became interested in de Kooning's work. And though I never really wanted to only, to emulate abstract expressionism, I liked the idea of using paint as a way to, for its formal elements and such as like balancing out a composition with color, but also as a way of kind of conveying a mood, kind of conveying an idea. And so, yeah, that's what I'm doing here, conveying an idea. Can we go to the next one? Same here. The photograph is of my cousins butchering a sheep. You can see the sheep's head there at the bottom. More hymn pages. So I guess these are, in a way, kind of memories. And when I was conceptualizing this series, one of the things I wanted to watch out for was that this was just sort of a narcissistic reflection of my own experience. I mean, I didn't want to discount my experience, but I wanted to kind of use my experience as a bridge to talk about other people's experiences, and particularly within the context of assimilation. The balance, the kind of tricky balance that necessitates either coming into or being occupied by a dominant culture, right? And how to maintain identity while also living within and hopefully successfully living within the dominant culture. And so these were examples from my family that I wanted to act as catalysts for people to start thinking about their own experiences, whether they were actually immigrants or not, and particularly within the context of, the surge in nationalism, both in this country and Europe particularly. The anti-immigrant attitudes, right? that we're also seeing, with the hate crimes against Asian people in this country. So these paintings, though, yes, perhaps my reflections on my own experiences, I wanted to use them to address larger issues. Yes. Next slide, please. And this was the most recent of the assimilation paintings. And perhaps, I don't know, maybe I was going to say perhaps the most de Kooning-esque, but I guess that's arguable. In the kind of black and white square is a kind of obscured photo of the Three Stooges dressed in Indian, Native American costumes. And of course, I love the Three Stooges. And I guess that's a part of culture, of growing up, and assimilating as well. Is that in the 1960s, which is when I was a child, we watched this TV sitcom called F Troop, and some of you may remember it, those of you that are older, where all the Native Americans were portrayed by white people, which is that's not unusual for the time, but the fact that this was a comedy and that both the white people and the so-called native people were kind of buffoons, I thought was really interesting. And it was a favorite of my family, watching this show. And that sort of complexity is really interesting to me, and also because of the potential dangers of it, right? Where popular culture or dominant culture can end up defining how you actually think about your own culture, right? And how it, especially when it's the norm, right? Where no one's really, at least in the 1960s or 70s, vocalizing, those sorts of criticisms, how that can be very damaging. So, what's next? I wonder what's next. Oh, okay. Living Beneath a White Rainbow. This is very much connected to the assimilation paintings as well, though for some reason I don't include it in the series. I was looking at a lot of Philip Guston at this time, so there's an acknowledgement there with that big hand coming out of the hogan. That's my little nod to Philip Guston. The two figures in red are my grandparents. They're surrounded in this fluorescent yellow inside the hogan. Oh, I should say the hogan is a traditional Navajo dwelling. And then you can also see that yellow above the concrete teepee up at the top of that road. And before this painting, I was doing a series of paintings that were addressing environmental pollution on the Navajo Reservation. Not only the Navajo Reservation, but just in terms of indigenous lands, all over the world. And also the No DAPL protests were still going on, actually, were going on at the time. So, but what the fluorescent yellow is addressing is the uranium pollution on the Navajo Reservation that's still there. And I remember reading several years ago that certain cancer from uranium pollution was big on certain parts of the reservation. People were actually building hogans out of rocks that were contaminated with radiation. And none of this was in like popular culture. None of this was like known by a large segment of the population. And so I thought, so here's another example of something that I used a specific situation in order to make a work that I think is about much broader issues in terms of how cultural and sacred lands are exploited and damaged, by commercial enterprises. Hence the upside down American flag. The white rainbow sort of represents the for me at least, the kind of paternalistic paternalistic colonialism, I guess. So could we, next slide, please? Okay, so this is a print series called Collectibles. These are all photographs of my family. The text is lifted from, there's a couple of sites. The main one is the Bradford Exchange, which is a company that creates and sells kitsch figurine objects, all sorts, but also of quote, native style figurines. And I think we've all seen, representations of these really extremely kitschy things, like, but they always involve some sort of, either hot young maiden or brave, usually shirtless, like, and some sort of like wolf. And of course there's, like crystals and all sorts of things. And so the texts are lifted from the copy for these items. This is the first one that I did. And that's my mother and her friend on the other side. I don't know who the gentleman is in the middle though. Next, please. My grandparents. And so I thought, kind of juxtaposing the text with images of my family, for me at least, really brought, well, I mean, what is disturbing, I think, for just imagine, imagine, doing that to your own family. So I don't know, maybe, hopefully I'm not going to be sued by any of my family members. So the reason I decided to obscure their faces also was because I didn't want their identities to be, I didn't want their identities to be commoditized, so that these are their own, that's their business, right? You as a viewer have no right to identify with them or think, that sort of thing, I mean, because that happens a lot in terms of like photographs of Native American people, particularly old photographs, like how regal they look, or how, people project a lot of things onto photographs of Native Americans. Next, please. There's my aunt and uncle, one of my aunts and uncles. Next. My cousins. And I think there's my grandmother. So I think we can kind of go through these fairly quickly. Okay. What's next? How am I doing on time?
I think that's at the end of the slideshow, John, okay. But we can go back.
Okay, can we go back to the, there's 3 paintings called the landscape memory improvisations. No, keep on. There we go. So these 3 paintings are titled Landscape Memory Improvisations 1, 2, and 3. So also this idea of wanting to improvise with paint. Instead of the hymn pages, what I used were Google satellite images of my family's land in northern New Mexico. And used those again as catalysts for these mixed media paintings. I don't know that we have any details of these ones in the slideshow, but and these are probably closer to well, I don't know if that's true. I was going to say closer to to pure abstractions, but I'm not really sure that that's true. The thing is that with this series too, as I was painting them, I really tried not to think about them. I really tried not to like allow myself to say, okay, I'm going to do this because it means this. That's why they're improvisations, right? I wanted to stop trying to like control and have things figured out before I created them. So, and there was fun and there was fun in that, and there was freedom in that. But I also think that it got to, I don't know what a psychologist might say, but I think that it also kind of allowed me to go deeper than I might have, in terms of my own kind of thoughts. Can you think of anything else I should talk about? Have I said enough? I'm hoping I haven't bored anybody. Oh, could we go back? It's okay. So back forward again. There we go. That's good. So this was the second painting after I Can't Speak My Mother's Language. Till We Meet Again was one of the hymns that I used. And I think, aesthetically, it's probably the closest to I Can't Speak My Mother's Language than to the other paintings. But it's sort of the same idea. I think the plane and the hand kind of being shoved in, and even the fish around this kind of, ambiguous blob hovering over the water. For me, they kind of allude to this idea of exile, of leaving, but also, trying to come back. Yeah, the more I stare at this piece, the more I like it, actually. Okay, so I think that's about all I can muster.
Thank you, John.
Thanks.
I guess I'll jump in with a question just because you skipped over it, but the first installation, you talked about it a little bit, but just thinking about the role of religion in your work, which you touched on, but I wonder if you could speak more explicitly about that, because when you enter the exhibition, it is really an overwhelming experience with the sound and the hymn books and all of that presentation is very moving. And I wonder if you could speak a little bit about the role of religion in relation to assimilation as well.
Boy, I sure would like to be lying on a couch. Wow, the role of religion. Okay, so having grown up Jehovah's Witness and leaving that world view behind, in my early 20s, it's basically I had to unlearn so much, about my own culture, but about also all the other kind of beliefs that I held to be true. And I'm not the only person, obviously. People go through that all the time. But the thing about Christianity, and there are definitely elements that I really admire about Christianity. I happen to be a very big fan of medieval art, particularly like northern European medieval art. But the thing, like, how could such a initially great idea just go so wrong, and how could such a great idea be the source of the justification for oppression and violence and And the truth is that any great idea could probably be the justification of those types of things, right? And so which just goes to show that, I mean, we have to be active thinkers, right? We have to be questioning these things. And I think that's one thing that I learned in my early 20s when I was abandoning Christianity. As first of all, I realized that I couldn't just choose another religion, right? It was not a matter of, it wasn't this sort of superficial layer of choice. It was a matter of deep connection, right? And even though, I mean, because I wanted to be able to turn to my Navajo heritage, but the thing is that I didn't live on, I didn't live within the realm of the Four Sacred Mountains, and I didn't live within the mythologized geography. I never had a ritual performed over me, and so that all seemed like it would have been like an arbitrary decision. And I was living in Santa Fe, New Mexico for several years, which, as some of you may know, is like the kind of a major hub of sort of New Age ideology, right? And seeing how aspects of spirituality from numerous cultures were sort of being just monetized, right? Just turned into a style. And I wanted to be careful not to do that. Now, unfortunately, that sort of left me without any sort of belief structure. And I think I still kind of am in that realm. But I've gotten used to it. And so this may sound a bit cliche, but I guess I feel like coming out of that, that I've been in sort of a spiritual no man's land, in a sense. What is the term? Liminal space. I mean, in terms of that I'm in a constant process, I suppose, of like questioning myself, not just the world, but myself, my own responses to the world, or my own interpretations, or my own thoughts on the world. And I don't know, either that means that, I need some sort of therapy, or whether that means that that's a good place for an artist to be. And I suppose it could mean both. But I like I said, I've gotten used to it, and I've learned how to utilize that in my work as an artist and as an educator, and I suppose even as a father. In terms of like trying to be sure not to kind of buy into anything, I suppose.
But it's interesting with that installation in particular that is at the entrance of the exhibition, just in how Christianity, which is like just in relation to your larger idea of assimilation, how the Bible is being translated, and sort of that role of translation, and sort of this like back and forth that takes place in processes of assimilation, that I think is particularly interesting in that work itself. But I don't know if Asia also has questions about your work and exhibition too. I just wanted to point that out.
Thank you. Thank you, Ruba.
Yeah. No, I think it's a super interesting conversation, and I think that's one of the things that I really appreciate about your work, John. And as the daughter of a mother who works in Native healthcare and provides mental health services, we almost never get any data about. We get a lot of information about all the negative impacts of trauma and colonization, but nobody's ever studying the perhaps positive or the strength-based aspects that come out of these experiences Native people have together. And I feel like your work bridges both. It acknowledges these complex histories, but then also comes from a place of real innovation and creativity and community cohesion. I see Sarah clapping. And are somehow also really funny, and then also make you want to cry and do all the things really beautifully together. So that's one of the things I love about this collection of work. I was wondering, John, especially as you're talking about how you work so intuitively, and for me, at least, when I show a body of work together, sometimes it feels like it's finished, or it helps me realize new things. And as you've been working so intuitively on these paintings, did anything come through for you that felt unexpected, or that gives you kind of a clear sense of where you might want to go next with your work, or showing things, or even as you said, as a teacher or father, or anything else that might have come through?
Well, I'm at the point right now where, you know, after the show, you know, having shipped the show out, right? It's like, glad that's over, right? But I'm at the point where I'm like, okay, so do I have more to say with this process, you know, or this body of work, right? And I think I do. I'm not sure that I want to. I want to be very conscious of not just like, oh, that worked, so I'll just keep doing that. You know what I mean? Just sort of churning out the, you know, what churning out what the people like, you know. So I'm careful about that. And I think, I don't know, you know, it's like I realized that, like when the whole Art 21 thing happened, which was a long time ago, you know, that's what, 20 years ago, something like that. I realize now that I'm a better artist, you know, and so I kind of wish it would have happened later in my life. But so I'm guessing, or at least I'm hoping, that I'm going to continue to grow as an artist. That that the I don't know if I want to. I don't know if I want to call them insights as so much as just reactions to what's happening in the world are always going to be present in my thought. I guess that's the thing, is that, you know, what I tell my students is that you know, I'm at the point in my work, which I think is sort of the sweet spot, which is where I think my work is just a reflection about what I think about, you know. I mean, that's probably the simplest way for me to say, to describe my work, is that it's just, it's a physical manifestation of what I think about. That's it, right? And so so for me, it's the thinking then that has to develop. It's the awareness and the questioning that has to develop. And for me, the how that manifests in my art is just gonna happen, I guess, as an extension. You know, I don't feel I can say this is what I'm gonna do next, because I don't necessarily know what I'm gonna be thinking about next. But I do know it's not going to just be like, you know, like I'm thinking about this, now I'm thinking about this, you know, there's going to be some sort of connection, right? So I don't know, that's a hard question, because it yeah, you stumped me, Asia. I don't really know, but I like that. I like not knowing. I mean, sometimes it can be depressing. I mean, I think every artist goes through the like now what the hell do I make? You know, I don't know what to make next, you know, and you're just staring at a blank canvas or whatever. So I guess I'm staring at a blank canvas right now.
Well, I think with that, it's really interesting to think about your, like, when you say your work is really like what you're thinking about, also just your use of your inclusion of like popular culture or like mainstream culture, or found materials. I'm just thinking about the collectibles, like the language is found, but the imagery is quite personal. It's your family, but how you think about that line between what you were saying earlier, where the work is like incredibly personal, but it's also bigger than just your personal history or narrative, and you're sort of reaching out, but how that actually is connected to issues of representation and popular culture and mainstream culture.
Yeah, I mean, that's all connected, right? And so I mean, like pop culture, I mean, as a 60-year-old man now, I don't know how connected I can say that I am to pop culture, but it does seem to me that there's a lot of what hasn't changed is that there's a lot of sort of latching on to like there was recently, I can't remember where it came from, but someone shared on Facebook a few criticisms, I think, of the land acknowledgements, that it's kind of become fashionable, and what is there really any good use for land, to good reason for land acknowledgements. And I don't know if everyone knows what I'm talking about, but in terms of like when someone gets up to talk and they say we want to acknowledge that this is Navajo, traditional Navajo land, or whoever the tribe might be, and of course the thing is that tribes had also been warring over certain lands, right? So it's like, okay, so whose side are you going to take, right? But it always, I mean, it becomes sort of this thing that gets checked off, right? It's like, okay, we got to do that, and now we're okay, right? We've done that. And there's so many things, particularly these days, that seem to be like start off, I think, wanting to make a difference, but then just sort of become these things that get checked off, I can't say that I have an answer, to that, but in terms of like how that doesn't seem to change. And that's something that I think in terms of like the art that I'm interested in, it's not a calling out, but it's more of an asking of questions. I guess that's the thing, is that a scenario that I tell my students is that, I have friends that are much more politically activist as artists than I am, and sometimes we talk about, our work together, and I say, sometimes I kind of feel that, it's like we're in a boat, and Lily, I use this, I mentioned this to you, that we're in a boat, and like, my friends that are much more activist oriented, the boat starts leaking, and then they rush to patch that hole, but then another hole, appears and starts leaking, and so they rush over there, and the danger is that we get so used to just running from hole to hole that we're not asking the question, why does this fucking boat keep leaking, right? And for me, that's what I want to understand through art. I'm much more interested in examining what are the systems that are in place, what are the experiences, how do we as colonized peoples oppress ourselves, right? What is the, I mean, just those sorts of questions, right? Which are not easy checkoffs, right? Because we're complicit. I guess that's the thing. How am I and how are we complicit in what it is that we're criticizing? And so much of that does not get discussed. And I encounter that with my students, that are learning about, social justice and all these important things, and are like want to like fix things, and that's great. but they're not seeing how, they're not realizing how they're complicit. And that has to be like a starting point. And I guess that's one thing that I hope to do with art is I want there to be more navel gazing, I suppose, you know, as opposed to calling out, you know. I want to, yeah, I don't know. I don't know if that makes any sense at all, but that's kind of how I see what or at least if that's not necessarily what I do, that's what I hope to be doing, you know. And if I hadn't quite figured that out yet, then that's also part of my development, you know, as an artist, is like, how do I do that through art?
Thank you, John. I see there's a couple questions in the chat I want to make sure we have time for. Lily, did you want to read those, or did you want us to read some of them?
Whatever you feel comfortable with. If you want to read them, go ahead.
Okay, I'm going to start with the one that's clearly from an Indigenous person to me, and then maybe do the next one after that. So, or Angelica, did you want to just ask the question? Is that allowed? Any preference? Okay, I'm going to read it, barring anybody turning their mic on Zoom. So Angelica says, I'm wondering what important role the act of translation plays in your work, whether through abstraction or working more intuitively, or your other formal decisions within painting and installation. Do you find there's a need for protection of the sacred or protection of your Indigenous identity through your work? I feel the way you approach portraits and your painting speaks to this. As an Indigenous artist, I'm always having this conversation with myself about how much to share with my audiences and what I keep close, and these issues of representation. And she leans on abstraction as a way of protecting culture. Does that bring anything up for you, John?
Yeah, you know, I mean, even though I don't necessarily consider myself a spiritual person, and I think spirituality, you know, is something that the New Age kind of ruined for me in terms of living in Santa Fe. That said, I have a lot of interest and respect in spiritual practices. I mean, I don't do them. However, it's sort of like, you know, when with the collectible series where I blank out my relatives' faces. There are aspects of, you know, and I can't speak for all Native cultures, but, you know, I can't even speak for Navajo culture, but, you know, in terms of like Navajo culture, there are certain things you don't do, right? I mean, there's certain symbols that are only used within a ritual context, and to kind of like make them permanent or something is not only a desecration, but is also dangerous, right? So yes, I'm very careful about not, or at least I try to be. Hopefully I haven't. Hopefully I'm not guilty about it, but guilty of it. But I try to be very careful in terms of like what symbols that I use or how much I give away. Now that said, I can't say that I know that much. You know, I mean, I'm not like in the like I said, I never had a ritual performed over me. I've never had, you know, a lot of experiences that maybe the everyday Navajo, you know, living on the reservation or near the reservation have had. But I'm very protective of it. Yes. So I guess in terms of my artwork, yeah, certainly abstraction is a way to protect. I mean, whatever way you can. I think it's a matter of, I mean, just because I don't necessarily believe, and I can't, and here's the thing is that, you know, for Native spirituality, at least in terms of like Navajo spirituality, it's not a sense of belief, right? I mean, it's not like I'm not sure that any Navajo on the reservation believes that, you know, there were the hero twins that, you know, that who, you know, that slayed these monsters and all that. But the mythology is so alive in terms of the the geography, you know. Like I remember when I was young, you know, driving on Highway 40 past Mount Taylor, going from Los Angeles to Albuquerque, just west of Albuquerque. There's a lot of volcanic rock from Mount Taylor because it was, you know, I guess it's a dormant volcano. And my mother told me that that was actually the coagulated blood of a monster that was slain, right? That's not like my mother believed that that actually happened, right? But it's part of the mythology, but it's understood also as meaningful, right? It's significant to the people and to their identity, but it's not, I don't know that I would say that it's a belief system, you know? So it's a very different, you know, like I told many people that have shown interest in Navajo spirituality. It's like, it's not, we're not looking for converts, you know. It's not like Buddhism or Islam or Christianity where you can convert, you know. It's a whole, you know, life experience, right? And so and one of the things that I'm really worried about is that is good intentional people with good intentions may not, and hopefully I'm not going to piss anyone off here, but, you know, in terms of like people with good intentions not knowing how to respond to the spiritual other than as a consumer, you know, that it's a choice, like, you know, Colgate or Crest, you know, and it's not that, right? It's a whole way of identifying and living and yeah, it's much more complex. So yes, I am protective.
Should we read the next question that we got? Let's do that. Thank you, John. The other question is from Jay Sebastian, asking about the juxtaposition of words and visual images in your work. If you wanted to talk a little bit more about that, imagery and text relationship. As introspective and also very direct, how you kind of play with that line.
I don't, gee, you know, I don't know that I think about it that hard. I mean, like, you know, in terms of the like responding to the hymns, right? You know, improvising, using the hymn pages as a catalyst for improvisation, right? I purposely with this series tried not to think of a response, right? And I can't even say that I was intellectually responding at all, or even subconsciously responding. I don't know, you know, maybe sometimes, you know, I can't say every brush was a response to every word, you know. But I guess the way that I think of words on a painting is, you know, it's another image, I suppose, you know. Yeah, I guess I don't know. I'm not sure that I'm answering your question. I think the thought came into my head just now, John, you're not that deep. So maybe that's the answer.
Well, I think, you know, the juxtapositions are really, I mean, they are deep with the collectibles
Well, that's true.
works, at least. It's like these phrases that are so bizarre, you know, it just, it triggers thought. It's a jarring juxtaposition, even though it's, you know, something is being evoked that is like both extremely problematic and then also like intimate and real. And it's like a question around like authenticity, really. And I think that's like what also, I think, a strong underlying question running through your work, not only issues of assimilation, but also questions around authenticity.
I guess, the thing with the collectibles, though, I mean, they're not my words, right? So it's easier for me to actually respond to them, right? I mean, I was thinking, like, for example, in the painting, I can't speak my mother's language. I mean, that, those are my words. And so that's what I mean in terms of, like, I think of them more like an image. I was going to try to do another, the painting, Till We Meet Again. I was going to write that too at the bottom, but then I just kind of thought, it doesn't really need that. And then the danger is that it becomes a shtick, that it just sort of becomes, so I'm going to do these paintings with words at the bottom, right? And so it's like, so when it's my words, it's a very different thing. But yeah, I take your point, Ruba, because in terms of like using copy that's already there, it's easy for me to react to them, right? I mean, kind of, gutturally, in terms of, like, pissing me off, or maybe even making me laugh at the same time as pissing me off. And so in that sense, the words kind of take, the words are directing the show in a sense, right? In terms of, like, it determines which images I choose to pair them with. And sometimes it seems like an obvious choice, and other times not so much. But yeah, I understand what you're saying. Yeah.
I would add just really quick, with your work, John, I always get this sensation of reading between the lines. Like the actual text seems just like a tool to get people to think about all the other things surrounding those statements. And I'm also very aware that reading something like, I don't speak my mother's language, means something different to me immediately than it might to another viewer. So yeah, I think to the question, it is really interesting how they're very direct, in some ways very simple statements, but then there's all these other kind of maneuverings that happen in your head once you start trying to translate them.
Thank you for pointing that out. I mean, the thing with the collectibles is that, again, it's easy to look at them, I think, like, oh, well, John's pretty angry, well, in terms of, like, how his, how Native Americans are being, commodified or whatever, right? But and that would be true, but that's a very, for me at least, it's a very kind of superficial layer. For me, again, it goes back to why is there a desire for these objects, right? What sort of need do these objects, these kitsch objects, fulfill in people, right? And there's always this sort of pseudo, spiritual content, presentation of these, and anyone should just go to the Bradford Exchange, and look up native, type in native and see what comes up, right? I mean, it seems laughable, probably to most of us, like, oh, how completely unsophisticated, but that need is there. And here's the thing, is that the topper is, my mother liked some of these kitsch objects, right? So how the hell does that happen? So how do we buy into the romanticization of our culture, through someone else's, like, weirdness, or lack or something, and that to me is fascinating, and for me, the collectibles are really meant to kind of ask that sort of question, like, why? Because even for me, join in a dramatic, what is it, a spiritual quest, who doesn't want to do that? And so that sort of enticement, it's like, yeah, I want some form of connection, but then why? What am I lacking in my own life? Or what am I, you know, I think those are the bigger questions that I hope are, you know, that I guess my work in general can be a catalyst for. At least, yeah, hope. I don't know if it is, but at least that's my hope, you know.
Well, on that note, we were supposed to wrap up at 5. So unless anyone else has any other final comments or questions, I just wanted to say thank you so much to John, Asia, and Ruba for being here, for having this conversation. The exhibition is on view just one more day. Gallery's open until 6 p.m. today, and then the final day is March 31st. We're open from noon to 6, so if you haven't had a chance to come see the show, please do. It's very beautiful. And yeah, thanks all. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, everyone, for hanging out. It was really nice.
Thank you.
And thank you, Lily and Ruba and Asia and Josie and everyone connected with Q.